Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another EdenNap webinar titled Academic Freedom versus Algorithmic Reality: Who Shapes the Digital Classroom? I am Giedrė Tamoliūnė. I'm an associate professor from Vytautas Magnus University Education Academy, involved in research in the digital education field, and of course, for the last several years, actively engaged into research and practice related to AI in education and as a balance to digital well-being, trying to balance research with my life and with the professional life as well. And today, also, I'm a deputy chair of EdenNap Steering Committee. EdenNap stands for Network of Academics and Professionals, and it serves as a bottom-up activity for Eden members, bringing ideas not just from organizations who are members of Eden Network, but also from individuals who are invited to join our network, to collaborate, to share their ideas and engage into knowledge building. And having these webinars stands as one of the opportunities or activities serving for the purpose of building knowledge and sharing knowledge across our community members. And our today's topic is, I think, very interesting, challenging, and at the same time very relevant and right on time. For me, when I was preparing for this session, I had a chance to take a look at the recent OECD report on digital education that brought some interesting ideas, which I think relate closely to today's topic regarding the use of AI. As this report noticed quite an interesting paradox that students using general purpose AI are producing higher quality work than ever before, compared for several years. But some recent research studies show that when you take the AI tools away, the actual learning gains often reverse. The OECD approaches this as a metacognitive laziness, or in some cases better known maybe for us as cognitive offloading, when we kind of reach the point where technology can help students perform well, but we are not sure as teachers, educators, whether they learned a single thing. Not, of course, this sounds strictly maybe, but what they learned. And at the same time, teachers themselves are facing also a bit of professional crisis, some teachers, as research shows that nearly half of educators feel that like they are cheating when they use AI or not doing their jobs properly when they use AI to assist with their job tasks. And one of these tasks is, let's say, automated feedback. And while students are reporting that AI feedback, in most cases, is more accurate, it still lacks the contextual soul that comes from a teacher who knows their learning journey and how they progressed and the learning context. So this brings us to our webinar session and to the core of our webinar, which I would say is more about this pedagogical maybe alignment and having this, even looking from different perspectives, but still focusing on pedagogical approaches. This webinar explores whether digital tools that we use to teach and research are silently standardizing the very art of academic inquiry. And today, together with presenters, we will take a look at the tension between these high-tech innovations like AI and the fundamental right to maintain a unique, independent academic voice. So for this, I want to introduce themselves two amazing speakers that agreed to share their expertise and their knowledge and their research and practice in relation to this topic. So we have Associate Professor Aušrinė Pasvenskienė from Vytautas Magnus University, Lithuania, and Professor John Keating from Maynooth University in Ireland. Maybe you can introduce yourself now, and then later we will jump to presentations. Please, Aušrinė.
Thank you, Giedre. It's really a pleasure to join this webinar. Thank you for invitation. And so now I will shortly introduce myself. I come from the legal background. I'm the professor in law at Vytautas Magnus University, Faculty of Law. But I wrote my PhD dissertation on academic freedom as a human right, and since then I always had an interest in law and education intersection, so anything that relates to that, and also law and technologies. So I've been researching in this area quite a bit, and academic freedom is my really very preferable topic since I wrote my dissertation and actually just recently finished my monograph on the same topic, which will be published quite soon. So it's really a pleasure to talk about academic freedom and what else I can say about myself. So I also teach in Education Academy. I'm happy that I have a course that is related to education. I teach human rights in education in Vytautas Magnus University and Education Academy. So that's my short introduction.
Thank you, Aušrinė. And please, John.
Thank you. Deirdre, it's a pleasure also to be here and to meet you all and to work with you on this, controversial topic, really, and very present topic. I'm John Keating, and I'm a professor in computer science department at Maynooth University. I'm also the associate dean for teaching and learning in the Faculty of Science and Engineering. So I get to look at, have this holistic view of what's happening with education in our faculty. And I also contribute to the university policies and development across the university as well. I've been teaching in computer science since 1990. My PhD was in experimental physics, actually, and I took up a position in computer science then, and I've been teaching software engineering and coding mostly since. It's a long time. Okay, I'm getting close to retirement now. But along the way, I did a master's in education and science learning and a doctorate in applied linguistics in education as well. So I'm really interested in how students learn science and how we teach science and pedagogies. So this has been a challenging time for me personally over the last few years. AI is having a huge impact on computer science, and so everything I do relates to this. I'm thinking about this now, and so it's a pleasure to talk about it here. I'll hopefully show some of my consolidated thinking, if it's possible to do that at this stage. I would say that I have not handwritten any code in the last nearly 3 years myself. Okay, I use AI for all the assisted coding, and so I've fully immersed myself in how this would work, with a view to seeing how this pedagogy might work with students as well. So some of that will happen today. So I'm living the scenario really that we see in industry and looking at how it might impact and how we teach. So I'm only going to talk today from my personal perspective. I can't talk authoritatively about anything and any other perspective. So I'm hoping it'll be a small contribution. So thank you, Keith.
Thank you a lot, and I have no doubt that it will contribute to our overall discussions, as we have so many webinars and discussions happening on AI now during these webinars, also during the Eden conferences. So looking at it from different perspectives, and in this case, we will have from legal perspective and also from computer sciences but still with a focus on education, I think this will bring the biggest added value, no? Just to trying to understand how we can manage this freedom, if it's possible to have the freedom still, if to keep my authentic voice in this context or not, and how to implement that in our teaching practices, daily teaching practices. It will be interesting maybe to discuss after your presentations. So for now, I think we can start and switch to our presentations by each of you, and later on we'll have still some time for questions, maybe from some participants, or we'll discuss in between ourselves. So Aušrinė, the screen is yours.
Okay, I think everything is visible, right? My screen
Yes.
is fine. Okay, so my interest in academic freedom comes from the times when digital technologies, especially artificial intelligence, were not present in education. And it is really a very broad topic and can be discussed from various perspectives. But today I will discuss a relationship or how application of digital technologies in education impact, or what kind of impact has towards academic freedom. And my presentation will consist of two parts. First, I want to discuss a little bit about the essence of what it is academic freedom, to demonstrate its legal status, how important it is to protect it. Then also what academic freedom entails, what are the main elements of academic freedom, and second part of presentation, I will provide some examples of how digital technologies in education influence academic freedom. So first part will be more on academic freedom, theoretical part, and then some examples. And I would like to start my presentation with this paragraph. It comes from the book that was written by the former dean of the Yale Law School, Robert C. Post. It was the first book I bought years ago when I was considering doing my PhD on academic freedom. And this paragraph very well illustrates the essence of what academic freedom is. So I will quickly read it. As I type these words, I gaze out at my backyard and I know that there is a large oak in the northwest corner of my lawn. I have knowledge of this oak, both because I can see the tree and because I have reason to trust my senses. My knowledge of this oak should be contrasted to my knowledge that cigarettes cause cancer. I cannot acquire the latter from a form of knowledge merely by observing the world and by trusting my senses. In fact, I have learned about the carcinogenic properties of cigarettes by studying the conclusions of those whom I have reason to trust. We call such persons experts. How did these experts come to know that cigarettes are carcinogenic? Certainly not in the same way that I came to know about my oak tree. They instead deployed the full and elaborate apparatus of modern epidemiological and statistical science. The science consists of practices of knowing that can be acquired only through training and instruction. The practices create forms of knowledge that are constantly expanding through speculation, observation, analysis, and experiment. Any modern society needs expert knowledge in order to survive and prosper. So I think that this example very well reflects the essence and the spirit of academic freedom, which is really very important, crucial to ensure free teaching, research, inquiry, academic debate, and they all are important for dissemination of knowledge and pursuit of truth. But this example is not only about that. When reading it, rereading it just some time ago. These words that you see in red, like experts, trust, science, expert knowledge, they kind of sparked interest in wondering whether we can use the same standard in the times with artificial intelligence taking a huge role in education sphere. And that was the reason why I started researching in this area, trying to find out how digital technologies influence academic freedom. So I will come back to this technological part, but now I want to go back to the concept, the essence of academic freedom. And first of all, it is a legal principle, and it has a solid legal background. It is established in the numerous international declarations. As you see in the slide, there's a norm taken from International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which states that respect requires to respect the freedom indispensable for scientific research. And also its commentary, which suggests a very important relationship between academic freedom and the right to education, stating that the right to education can only be enjoyed if accompanied by academic freedom of staff and students. Then it is also recognized in the Bologna process, and a very important document for academic freedom is the European Convention on Human Rights, which actually does not contain a specific provision on academic freedom. However, the European Court of Human Rights has recognized that issues related to academic freedom fall within the scope of Article 10, which guarantees the right to freedom of expression. So through its case law, the European Court of Human Rights has affirmed that academic freedom, and in particular the ability of scholars to express their views, conduct research, and share findings, deserve protection as a special aspect of freedom of expression within the academic context. Of course, it took a while for the court to recognize this right, but the first appearance was in 2009, case of Sörgük versus Turkey. And then in the European level, in the European Union level, academic freedom is explicitly protected by Article 13 of the Charter of Fundamental Rights of the European Union, and here it is established explicitly and says that the arts and scientific research shall be free of constraint, academic freedom shall be respected. And then we can see academic freedom in constitutions of some European countries, not every, because not all of them have academic freedom as such mentioned in the constitution, but certain elements definitely are in all constitutions, like freedom of teaching, freedom of research, and freedom of expression within a higher education institution, and etc. And then, of course, national higher education regulation usually also include academic freedom as such. Now, talking about the concept, conventionally, academic freedom, as I said, that this is a broad concept, and it has a number of elements that fall under this concept. So conventionally, we say that academic freedom has freedom of research, freedom of publication, freedom of teaching, expression, and speech within higher education, or academic context, which is called intramural speech or sometimes pure academic speech. Then freedom of expression and speech outside higher education institution, or also called freedom of extramural speech, and freedom to study. So today, as you see that there are so many elements, I'm not going to discuss all of them, but I chose to discuss the first two that are in a different color, which is freedom of research and publication and freedom of teaching. What's very important to mention about academic freedom is that academic freedom, it's not only about protecting the interests of individual academics, and it's not simply an end in itself. Academic freedom means that scholars have the right to carry out their academic work in line with the standards, ethics of their profession. And for example, in research, then there can be regulatory restrictions in the field of medicine, genetic engineering, nuclear power, state or official secret, and etc. And in teaching, it is very important to teach what is related to the subject matter, to choose the method that is the best for the students to acquire critical thinking, knowing the subject, and improving their general cognitive skills, and not to introduce any political views or one truth or religious beliefs. So it is a right, but also responsibility of academics that they have to bear in mind. So this is the short introduction of the concept of what academic freedom is, just very, very briefly to demonstrate the main elements of the concept. And now I will try to discuss a number of examples, and definitely I just selected some of them. We can discuss and have in mind various different occasions when digital technologies, artificial intelligence has a certain effect to academic freedom. So it's really not the full picture, but I was just trying to find certain examples when I started research about how it can influence or limit academic freedom. So these are just some examples that I found, or there was research done in these areas that I will discuss. So academic freedom, usually when we discuss about academic freedom, it is understood that it thrives in a marketplace of ideas, where we say that diverse views are welcome, that we question accepted beliefs, and that this is not only allowed, but also even encouraged to discuss, question accepted beliefs. And why it's important? Because it empowers educators to experiment, to speculate, to introduce even controversial and unpopular topics, as long as they are pedagogically relevant and as they are germane to the subject matter. And I want to take an example of online teaching and class recordings that became very widespread, especially during the pandemic, but it continued afterwards as well, and still is. And what concern emerged among academics, we call it a chilling effect on both faculty and also student speech. Why? Because academics know that when classes are recorded, professors may feel constrained in discussing sensitive or controversial topics, fearing that their words could be taken out of context or shared beyond the intended audience. And this can lead to self-censorship and limit open and critical discussion in the classroom, which is very important when we talk about academic freedom. And the same for the students. Also, students may be less willing to participate or share their views if they know that their contribution are being recorded and could be accessed by others outside the class. And this is quite a recent example of what happened in the University of California, where students, after the pandemic, they were actually demanding university to continue with universal recording of the classes. So the University of California Academic Senate addressed the issue in 2022 of mandated class recordings in two contexts. In one, it was regarding disability accommodations, and another one is post-pandemic student demand for universal recording. And in this case, the Senate, guided by the University Committee on Academic Freedom, emphasized that while the emergency shift to remote instruction during the pandemic justified temporary broad recording requirements, continuing such mandates would violate academic freedom and risk chilling both faculty and student speech, especially around sensitive topics. So the Senate considered that requiring all classes to be recorded for all students is seen as a clear violation of academic freedom and cannot be justified outside extraordinary circumstances like the pandemic. Then, of course, they had to have in mind the requirement, or someone's asking about, what about in case of disability or reasonable accommodations? And Americans with Disabilities Act requires reasonable accommodations for students with disabilities, including class recordings when necessary. And in these cases, this act or the requirements of the act take precedence over academic freedom. But the process must still consider the potential impact on faculty and student speech. So they came up with certain recommendations in this case. And although we say that it can be justified that in cases of a reasonable accommodation, we say that requirements take precedence over academic freedom. However, they concluded that Student Disability Office must consult faculty during the accommodation process and provide an appeal process for faculty concerns. So basically, even in these cases, you have to discuss the matter with the teaching professor. Student Disability Office should consider alternative accommodations that minimize the impact on free speech and academic freedom, and that strict limits should be placed on access to and distribution of recordings, ensuring they are only available to the accommodated student and protected from unauthorized sharing. So even if, like, let's say there's no alternative, faculty do not oppose to recordings, and it is decided that recordings will be made. In this case, strict limits must be in place regarding distribution of recordings and availability. So this is taken really seriously. Another aspect in regard to freedom of teaching is continuing about the lecture recordings, that it's not only that it has an impact not only to addressing the sensitive or controversial matters during the classroom, during the class, but also can affect in general the classroom dynamic. because lecture recordings tend to decrease the atmosphere and the degree of interaction in lectures, and the lectures can feel less dynamic, with fewer opportunities for spontaneous questions, discussion, engagement, and usually it can lead to instructors being stick closely to prepared material, reducing improvisation during the class. And also in these cases, professors feel less comfortable using informal comments and humor, which, by the way, both informal comments and humor are considered a very effective pedagogical tool to enhance students' engagement and help maintain student attention in the classroom. Another aspect that I found very interesting was that, and this is taken, this example is taken from the publication I read. This is not, I did not come up with that, but I just really liked the way the professors who wrote publication talked about how they see the class. And they say that before the digital age, each lecture was unique. The performance that varied with the audience and context, and they call it even like much like jazz, where the professor was a solitary craftsman. There was no way to mediate between the professor and their art. And now technological consistency, the tools that we apply, standardized teaching frameworks, data-driven interventions can lead to uniformity in course design and delivery. And it is considered that this might stifle pedagogical creativity and discourage experimentation. That, instructors even feel that they have limited flexibility to adapt materials to students' needs when it is prepared using digital technologies. You cannot be very flexible in the classroom depending on your audience and the mood and the way the class is going. So professors call it risking a one-size-fits-all approach. So introducing digital technologies into teaching in many ways feels like bringing a controversial topic into the classroom. It is justified when it is relevant and enhances learning. Because the same with academic freedom, it is protected and even encouraged to bring controversial topics into the classroom, but only when it has pedagogical value. So the same with the technology, there is a risk of adopting technology for its own sake rather than for pedagogical value. But if it has pedagogical value, without any doubts, it can be justified. And now some examples with the freedom of research. So of course, artificial intelligence now became an incredibly popular tool in academic writing and research. And well, we have in general, we had a reason to trust in science. However, with artificial intelligence in place, it is argued that it has potentially far-reaching implications for both science and society, but most importantly, for their relationship, for society and science relationship in regard to trust. There was this research performed where researchers analyzed a sample of scientific papers with signs of ChatGPT use found on Google Scholar. Google search was then used to determine the extent to which copies of questionable chat GPT fabricated papers were available in various repositories, databases, social media platforms. So they identified 139 questionable scientific papers, and 57% of these papers were focused on policy-sensitive topics like health, environment, computing. And the findings of the research state that fabricated papers mimic credible scientific writing, making them very difficult to distinguish from genuine research. And the authors of this publication, of this research, they highlighted two concerns that I think that are very relevant. So first, the growing number of fake studies generated by AI and entering research databases could overwhelm the entire scholarly communication system, putting the reliability of scientific literature at risk. And second, that there's a real danger that these AI-created papers, which often look very convincingly scientific, are designed to be easily found through academic search engines like Google Scholar, making it even harder to spot and stop misinformation. So lay audience may struggle to differentiate AI-generated content from peer-reviewed work, and it can create the risk of public trust in science. Another thing is that, of course, many AI tools rely on predefined algorithms that suggest standard phrasing, structure, and style. And over time, this repeated use of standard templates could lead to homogenized academic writing, and there's a fear that it will overshadow unique styles or methodologies. The suggestions provided by AI may unintentionally pressure academics to conform to a particular style or tone, and potentially limiting the diversity of academic voices. Studies note that actually over-reliance on AI may lead to template style papers. Particularly, it is, of course, common in standardized sections like summary, introduction, and discussions. Another problem is that excessive reliance on artificial intelligence tools for tasks like drafting, editing, or citations can have negative influence towards scholars' critical engagement with their own work, diminishing intellectual autonomy. Studies reveal that regular utilization of dialogue systems is linked to a decline in cognitive abilities, diminished capacity for information retention, and an increased reliance on these systems for information. So this over-reliance often occurs without verifying the validity and authenticity of the provided data. And the convenience of AI tools might lead researchers to accept AI-generated suggestions without sufficient scrutiny, potentially reducing the depth and rigor of academic inquiry. And research shows that while AI can help improve individual texts, the overall pool can become more similar to each other and to the AI-generated ideas. that could definitely lead to a homogenization of created output if AI assistance becomes widespread. So these are the examples. What I also want to say that I'm not against technologies, and I really use technologies myself, both in teaching and research. But what I'm trying to say with this presentation, that there are certain dangers that we have to be aware of them, because I'm also activist in defending academic freedom. So therefore, it is important to discuss about these challenges that we are having. So thank you very much. And now I probably pass the word to the colleague.
Thank you a lot, Aušrinė, for your insights. It really brought new ideas, concerns, and questions to my mind. Maybe something I was not aware, not that I was not aware of, maybe, but just, like double risk or double checking something, especially when you mentioned that academic freedom is also about making sure that we do not, as teachers, we do not introduce one truth or religious beliefs. And I was thinking then there is this risk when we think about using AI that is biased. So if I'm, as a teacher, not sure about the content, not, when we talk about the professional competence and the didactic, not maybe this way didactical, but the content knowledge, if I'm not 100% sure about the content, and then I take AI to help me with developing a content, then it's so easy to neglect this part and
Yes.
to introduce some beliefs or positions that should be avoided.
Yes, that's a very good remark. Definitely, yeah. That what academic freedom requires to be to encourage students to have different views, opinions, discuss, to find themselves the truth, not to introduce, just one angle, one aspect, but to help them to find the whole picture of a certain topic.
So I will have, maybe John, you have something to contribute to Aušrinė's presentation, and then we can move to yours, and I will have some questions afterwards as well.
Of course, of course. Thank you, Aušrinė. That was fantastic. I was taking and making notes as I was going along because I was sure I'd forget, as I moved on to the next interesting thing. It's always hard going first, okay? Because the person going next gets a chance to reply a little. But what struck me most was the resonances, with what and my experience. And I've been teaching computer science for 36 years. I've seen technologies come and go and approaches and everything. I love being in the front of a classroom. I like being there, but I adopted online recordings and various things of teaching, maybe 8-10 years before the pandemic. So I was fairly ready to go, but I wasn't really prepared for that full immersion into this, and the stress it brought, and the opportunities for students to ask questions. So there was that increased pressure as an academic because every student had a question, was able to ask it online, and and expected an answer. And you might get a mail at 2 in the morning, when the computer science student had finished looking at your class, your lecture online, and then say, at 8 o'clock, I didn't hear back from you, like in the morning, it was serious, serious stressful times. But I take your point about this move towards and the chilling aspect was fantastic. It was really that chilling effect was brilliant. But my feeling was that I did a peer review, and I do peer review of colleagues' lectures, and you see the colleagues doing all the digital things that they should be doing. So for example, you'll see them using Vivox in class and putting up something on the screen with all the students thing, and then moving on. And you've got all of these students sitting in front of you, and they're not actually asking them a question in the front of the classroom, And I mean, so I always think that technologies are fantastic, but there needs to be some reward for the students who actually come to the physical class, that, it has to be, a lecture has to be performative in some way, and it doesn't matter what the subject is. And, in computer science, they like nice, clear answers. What is the answer, and how do I code this? And, well, there's more than one way to do everything, with coding. But my best classes, I find, are the ones where I go in and give a topic overview, and the next day I go in and give another lecture on the exact same topic, and I say the opposite, because it's a controversial topic and because there are contested views, so that the students need to know that the answers are not right, and that search for truth sits in them, And I think you've just framed it beautifully in your lecture. And the controversial topics, one of the best things to do is to look at the Stack Overflow description of the people who are involved in writing software, and and they're men, mostly 96% men in California, who are between the ages of 25 and 40, allegedly heterosexual, and so they're writing the software for the rest of the world, and I look at my class and say, you guys don't all look like this. So how would software change if you were writing the software, and those kind of freedom to be able to do that is so nice, and long may it persist. I'm not criticizing the people who do it, but I'm just saying, you don't look like it. How would it differ for you? And so you have just given me a real belief and confirmation that standing in front of the class is good, notwithstanding all the text. So thank you so much for that. Now, unfortunately, my talk is very different to your talk. So I'm hoping that there will be some overlaps. I'll try to do so as I move along, because we're not like a TV cooking show where we had one made earlier, So this is live. And Guidra, you have the hardest job trying to unify both. But I'll share my slides now.
Yeah, but I think that now Aušrinė put a nice start for, not just start, but the background, for the discussion, keeping this the art of teaching at the heart still, and human being in the center. And what you mentioned, that it's all about adopting pedagogy for pedagogical value. I think this is a very good connecting link, bridging both presentations from what you shared about your work, how you approach teaching. So I think both presentations align now quite well. And so now the screen is yours. We can see the slides.
Thank you, Guidra, and Aušrinė. I'm delighted to be here making this presentation. I'll try to make connections with the former speaker where I can. So I looked at the title, Academic Freedom versus Algorithmic Reality webinar, and who shapes the digital classroom? And that was the resonance for me, really, and that's where it came out. So I looked at this, a title, then I felt like, I created a title called Design to Conform. It's provocative in a way, because, is it the tools, is it the platforms, the defaults? And then I have a counter argument as well for all of this. But I'm going to argue that the digital classroom already has an answer to who shapes it. Okay, it's not comfortable, but my aim is to make that answer visible and give you some theoretical tools for understanding it, and then show you what a deliberate response looks like in practice. I expect that, if this works, I expect that I'll have 5 sections, which probably take around 30 minutes. I'll move quickly through framing and evidence, and then spend much of the time on this theoretical lens and the reclaim agency, pedagogy, and so forth, and then just have a quick conclusion. So the trajectory really is, what's the problem? What kind of evidence do I have? Why? What do I do? And then who decides? I think that's really where I'm coming from in this. And I'm blocking my own screen there. Okay, so I guess what I'd like to say is, and talk about the academic agora. So the lecture hall was always this shared space, this shared public space. And where the ideas were exchanged and truth was pursued through discourse and debate. And lectures are like this. And I work in a public institution, and anyone can walk into your lecture, not just your students, and anyone is welcome, to come and in a way. And I'm a public servant, and I like to do this. I teach anyone everywhere. So we have to look at what might be replacing it. So it wasn't just a convenient location, really, I suppose, but we have this technological shift which changed the tools. We have an ontological shift that changes the nature of the activity. So we've moved from this shared space where ideas are encountered unpredictably to these personalized environments where the algorithm decides what each learner sees. So we have this fragmented series of personalized data bubbles where the truth of a subject is increasingly determined by the predictive power of the platform rather than the critical synthesis of the scholar. So the algorithmic reality is that we have these automated selection processes which construct what we see, read, and prioritize, and ultimately think. So I do believe that is not just a technological shift. It's truly an ontological one. Now, where am I speaking from? I'm a computer science professor since 1990. I've been coding since 1982. And I mostly focus on software engineering, web development, education. So I tend to look at code. So when I'm speaking here in terms of the material I talk about later in this class, I've actually looked at 474 different full code-based repositories that were written by both humans and AI. So I'm trying to look at how AI writes code and how humans write code and what are the differences and so forth. And I'm trying to understand really whether, teaching code development with AI is really that different from teaching code development, and what's the ultimate impact of all of this. I also teach students how to, I teach colleagues as part of a continuing education type project, professional development projects, how to vibe code and build AI apps to help with their work. So I've had 98 participants in my workshop so far. So I'm looking at the responses from them. So I'm trying to give you some evidence, really. It's not a universal claim, I'm not so arrogant to believe that there would be, but it's one from I think it's quite a sharp instance. And I think code, I know Aušrinė talked about text. I mean, as a product of engagement with AI, I'm looking at code as a product as well of the engagement with AI. And I think it's the most measurable, it's the most standardized, and it's most tempting to submit uncritically. So if we have this silent standardization is happening, it's an empirically tractable discipline. So it's worth asking where else might it be. So this is where I'm coming from. So I'm looking at three types of autonomy that I think are at stake here. So integrated domain theory identifies three forms of autonomy that could be threatened by an all-encompassing digital environment. The procedural autonomy, how we inquire. Are we threatened by systems that mandate specific correct paths? For example, the LMS structure, the templates, the approved workflow. Aušrinė talked about the templates for paper writing, but also for generating code. We have a look at the substantive autonomy, what we engage with, how that's threatened by algorithms that filter the content of scholarly reflection. So the platform surfaces what engagement data says is relevant. And then we have relational autonomy, with whom we think. So that's threatened by that erosion of face-to-face interaction. So peer review is a rubric. Office hours is a chatbot, all that kind of stuff, really, that we have this move. None of these actually are individually catastrophic, but I think together they can describe a significant erosion, and it's probably worth just pointing it out in a way. So anyway, I like to look at data, and I like AI to help me analyze these data as well, because there's often a lot of them. So I was looking at how AI generates and how humans generate code, those humans being students a lot of the time, and I look at repositories that they have. I look at the notion of authorship, is it human or AI, and does it show up in the structure of the code? We can look at code in the same way as we look at text, that Aušrinė said we can search and find all these repositories and so forth. So I teach something like React and TypeScript web-based stuff. So I looked at all of these various groups of human written versus 6 different AI platforms: Bolt, Lovable, Replit, V0, AI GitHub, Cloud Code. I found it was very difficult to try to understand them. So I developed a metric on structural quality called ACQI and looked at human maintainability. So I could try to have a level playing field to compare what humans do and what AI doing, and how I might say, well, is the AI code better? Is the student better? So the answer actually, when I looked at that question as to whether the authorship show up in the structure, well, wasn't what we would expect it to be. The mean quality is almost identical. But there's a variance, and that tells us the difference. And it's really interesting because, of course, when you think about it, AI is learning to code from humans anyway, in a way, because it's using all these repositories. And also, we have to think about the uniqueness. Pre-AI, all of our students were looking at Stack Overflow, they're looking at GitHub, they're copying codes and working from there anyway. The textbooks have pretty much universal codes. We've got web patterns that are defined for us already, just like the patterns of writing. So where's the opportunity for us to flex and show, originality as coding and as developers and in teaching that? So anyway, I did some work here. These are real data from my own research. But the story tells us that we have almost near parity between what AI writes and what AI writes. So AI is structurally competent, so almost parity. We have consistently adequate versus variably excellent. So the AI stuff is consistently adequate. The human stuff is variably excellent. So what the data is telling us, we are seeing that human stuff in there. And we see a lot of talk about, AI produces slop, code and so forth. But again, what's happening is that most of the measures are around the human readability of that code and that maintainability. Humans will look at the code and say, I can't maintain that. Our students will write code and we expect them to be able to maintain it. And that drives how we teach and what we teach. But AI doesn't care about presentation of code. It cares about how it works. So AI will think differently about code than humans do. So we have to teach students in a way that if they're going to assist with AI, they're going to actually have to maintain with AI. So we're comparing apples and oranges here. So it's very, 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 very tricky and difficult to deal with. But the core phenomenon, I guess, here is that the subtle process by which the algorithmic tools align with the art of academic inquiry with their own technical limitations. So to me, that's my issue. So when I look at code that's measurable, we see the same component patterns, we see the same state management choices, we see the same architectural defaults, and a dramatically compressed stylistic range. That's the impact for us in terms of what we do. And it's important that we know the impact. In the work, it's much harder to measure. So we have the same sentence cadence, structural templates, as Aušrinė was saying earlier, nuanced argument is replaced by probabilistic prose, and the machine's model of clarity over human model of complex inquiry. The issue, I see it, is that, and the danger is that AI output is not that AI output is bad, it's just all of the same kind of good, and that's that mediocrity, that move to that standardization. And that silent standardization, I believe, is real. It's happening in code and it is measurable. I can't measure, I haven't done any work on the text side, but it would be possible to do so as well. And I think it's a kind of an interesting one. I can show you the numbers, the sentence that matters, I suppose, really is that the danger is not that AI output is bad, it's that it's all the same kind of good. And that's a value judgment, by the way. It's the platform's judgment, not the disciplines. I think it's important to point that out at this point. So if you look at the digital classroom then, the architecture of platform very often is the policy of the class. I think we that was beautifully summarized in Aušrinė's earlier presentations, where she looked at what was happening in California and the presentations. So if you decide that something, like say during COVID, you have to have something using a recording, how it's structured, and all that it brings that's been covered already, then that architecture, and I'm not just talking about the architecture of the software, the architecture of how a class is, an architecture of a pedagogy, then that is the policy. That's it. You know, it becomes this. So anyway, if we think about the various platforms we have, like AI platforms, we have platforms where they're designed to summarize text. So they gravitate towards the summarization at the expense of the argumented synthesis. It's also monitoring the engagement scores. You know, you talked already about AI grading. We, for example, in our university, do not allow AI to grade at all. It's just not happening. It's a surveillance mechanism that's standardizing what good participation looks like. The LMS can be optimized for grading efficiency, so it automates this pedagogical judgment that should remain with the educator in a way. Now, we're working on teaching and learning policies here, and there are arguments to say that teaching and learning policies, you know, are also, you know, a pedagogical judgment as well, but that's another story. And so if we have these coding assistants, which is where I sit, I mean, if they've got strong style defaults, so it encodes one aesthetic of software as being the correct one. Okay. And very often when we talk about what happens with automated assessment, but if you have a class like I have of 350 web development students who are all in labs in a week, and they're all producing an assignment that needs to be evaluated and assessed, and how do and you give them a big project to do, you know, it becomes very difficult to find some uniqueness in there. You know, everything is about the pattern. I teach courses in software design patterns. It's all about a pattern. You know, there isn't even a lot of room for expression, for uniqueness in the code. It's different when we talk about user interface design or something, and then students have a chance to flex and, you know, show themselves and bring themselves to this and the style. But then there are rules which says, you know, well, you know, we have this rule, you know, you can't have more than 6 items in a list. You can't use this color scheme. You can't, you know, it must align with Google's, you know, design in order to be able to work. Or if it's liquid glass, if it's sitting on iOS, you have to conform. So it's no surprise with all this level of conformance that students are quite happy to take the conformance that comes with using AI as well. You know, I mean, despite, you know, you may get an anarchist in there, but usually you don't. You know, it's so every design choice has an implicit argument about what the education is for. So there is no platform pedagogically neutral, I guess, you know, and never has been in my mind, you know. So AI is no different in a way. So I also wanted to think and talk to you a little bit about the convenience traps associated with this. And again, we talked about the cognitive unloading earlier. Guidra spoke about that, you know, and we've always unloaded. Humans have always done cognitive unloading. We're lazy, you know, and we cheat. The body cheats all the time. If you try to lift weights, you know, you will do your best to cheat, even if it's not the right thing and is healthy for you. You will still do it because that's what you do. I'm more concerned with the cognitive disengagement, really. And Aušrinė mentioned this, that the AI provides to answer immediately, you know, and remember that AI LLM tools are rewarded for answering. They're rewarded for hallucination as part of the training process. You know, it's absolutely, you will never, ever, with the current training setup, be able to stop hallucinations. You see stuff that says, oh, if you put all this context around the prompt and you tell it not to hallucinate, not to do all this, that's rubbish. It will still do it, okay? It's meant to do it. It's designed to do it that way. And the prompt only forms a small part of what goes into the actual query that's anyway. So the point is the answer will always be there immediately. So this productive struggle, which I think is necessary for deep learning, is bypassed completely, you know, by utilizing AI, unless you work with it in a particular way. I have students who use Socratic approach, and I have taught them how to use the Socratic approach to engage with AI in this discursive dialogic type discussion without just asking for the answer, getting to it. And it works much better. So you can actually arrange your own engagement with AI as a student and learning to be able to do this. So the issue, of course, is that students will solve the problems without internalizing the underlying concepts there. So what's lost in the shortcut? The wrong turns, the false starts, you know, failing first attempt at learning. My assessments, when I give students, I allow them to fail things, you know, and experience failure and then learn from it and then resubmit and rework, you know, and it's character building. It's a learning process. It's, you know, it's so good. Allows you to be able to reformulate a question, have an encounter with uncurated complexity, serendipitous, non-linear inquiries, all of this stuff. So pedagogical autonomy is not only the freedom of the teacher to teach, it's the freedom of the student to encounter discipline in its full complexity, including dead ends. And AI removes the dead ends that remove some of the learning. When I was a first-year student studying mathematics back in 1982, I couldn't do my assignments because I was busy solving a problem that interested me more than the assignments. So I spent weeks at this. I went to the professor of maths and I said to the professor of maths, Prof, I'm trying to solve this problem. It's getting in the way. I can't do anything else until I solve this problem, you know. And he said, let me look at the problem, John. And so he took the problem and says, oh, easy. And I thought, oh, finally, I've got a solution, you know. And he said, the problem is that we don't know the answer to this problem. It's unsolvable mathematically. And I said, what do you mean? You're the professor of maths, right? You know, right? You should know this stuff. And he says, no, we don't know. We as a community don't know. It was the first real learning experience at university for me, was that dialogic engagement, that you know, experience of engaging with a knowledgeable mentor, the Vygotskian setup, you know, where I learned at that point, you know, that something wasn't doable. And no matter what I did, I couldn't figure that. I could never get that from AI. It would just tell me instantly, oh, by the way, this is an unsolvable problem. I didn't get the chance of figuring out I couldn't solve it, you know. So it's an interesting, yeah, I lament what we lose. But there are also gains, in a way. So we talked, and you mentioned earlier a little bit about students not learning. I mean, this research that Aušrinė mentioned about, you know, you give the students the AI and then you take it away, in a way, and you find that they're not able to learn. Well, I actually think this is cruel, you know, in a way, because it's an assessment trap, you know, and essentially following on from Briggs back from 1996. So the teaching and learning activities and the assessment tasks must be aligned to the internal learning outcomes, and they also need to be constructively aligned. I mean, Guido will tell you this in terms of our understanding and work in pedagogy and alignment. We often assess in a different way to what we're teaching. So if you introduce AI, and then you tell them they can't help with the learning, and then you tell them they can't use AI afterwards, then you actually have a mismatch between in terms of alignment between how we teach and how they learn and how we assess them. So we do need to look at that alignment if we are to use AI or not use AI. And in fact, if they have this shadow AI engagement happening behind the scenes, they're still utilizing AI that we don't know about, and the assessment is not helping. So this is why they may not be performing as well, in a way. So it's really unfair to change the teaching and learning activities without changing the assessment, if you introduce this, and then blame the intervention when it looks different. I mean, we've seen this, we know this from way back from studying education. So I mentioned my personal experience with the mentor. And so if you think about AI then as the more knowledgeable other and as the extended mind, for example, that we have when we think about pedagogy and teaching, and we know from Vygotsky and Brunner and later experts that the learning happens in that gap. So we want to move students into the ZPD, you know, really, you know, what they can do alone with a more knowledgeable other. And sometimes that, and for a long time, and the beauty of education technology and collaborative working is that collaborative working with peers allowed us to be able to have e-learning tools, or, you know, edtech tools that made us that provide an opportunity for us to engage with the more knowledgeable others, which were often other humans. Okay, so my PhD student Mark has been looking at this work, for example, and I know he attends lots of the Eden and NAP stuff, you know, so you will have seen some of that work, some of you. But also he's been looking, you know, he understands how this works, but we're showing it happening. But now Gen AI is the MKO for millions of learners. It is the more knowledgeable other. But who designs this more knowledgeable other, you know, in a way? And then does it scaffold towards the discipline or towards its own ends and outputs? And can learners actually develop a critical distance from it? Because, you know, we often have that dependence with students working in pairs and groups and so forth as well. So it's a bit like that. And we know about the Clark and Chambers extended mile, where the cognitive processes extend beyond the skull. So if AI is part of our extended cognition, institutional AI locking the constraints on how we think, not just the workflow, So if you choose an AI tool, it's choosing part of your cognitive apparatus. And then, you know, digital sovereignty becomes an epistemological question in a way. I'm also interested in language, of course. So I've done some work about how humans actually engage with AI. I have a paper at the Vibex conference in Glasgow later this summer on this. So I'm looking at how we engage. So I looked at 240 human turns across 5 AI coding sessions, captured all the engagement to see how they work. And it shows us that questions form a lot of the turns, and the commands only form about 38% of it. So the rest of it are engagement, are the feedback and state and highly specific prompts and so forth. But really, what's interesting is that you can teach people how to work with AI with dialogue rather than just generate something. You can have this extended conversation with AI, which allows you to be able to build code even by having some, you know, having some proper methodology. So question commands, feedbacks and states. So those are the various things. But so you can actually have really precise questions that give you the help of collaborative reasoning. You have a good register. You can learn to register. You can specify the prompt. It determines the epistemic quality of the encounter and so forth. So prompt language is an academic discourse with a non-human interlocutor, and teaching it is a form of intellectual agency, and I work with this, and I have done this as a methodology myself that I call slow vibing, and it's a method where we can engage with agency. So I worked through this one prompt vibe coding algorithm shapes all of the work. You can actually work with a phased, deliberate methodology where the practitioner shapes the work. So you're claiming back that control and that learning for yourself. So you do have that knowledge about other, which actually is an agent and an assistant that does some work, but you control that. So the key variable here is that not the AI model, but it's the process by which the human brings to the collaboration with the AI model. And this is the science stuff I'm trying to teach my students. And and I've looked at quality measures. We get really good quality stuff coming from this. It's almost better than some of the work we would have. If it's way better than some of the work we have, you just farm to AI. So I guess I'm sorry, I should probably speed up a little. But if we think about the pedagogical shift here, the core positioning is not whether students will use AI, because they already do. The question is, do we design for that reality or against that reality as educators? The undesigned path, they prohibit, then they fail to enforce it. The learning TLA changes, the AT stays the same, platform defaults become the curriculum, the agency is surrounded by omissions. The deliberate part is that we have AI as an explicit partner from day one. We have the comprehension before any construction, the process part of the assessment, and the educator designs the AI-mediated encounter. It's already happening. The choice is whether it happens by default or by design. And if we design, then we control what happens. So I would say that I've built a module, for example, that looks at this. I haven't tested it yet, so I have learning web development by building with AI, for example. And so it's an alternative to the existing approach. So it's an explicit intended coding partner from day one, not something to be prohibited, something to be directed and questioned and critically evaluated. I'm utilizing AI. I'm utilizing technology. I'm controlling the pedagogy as a human educator. I decide what the students will learn, when they learn it, how they pace it, the tracks they do. I will allow and give them opportunity to farm to AI and focus on the bigger questions about the design. They're still learning. They're still working through a design and process. They're still getting those skills. They still will work as groups and pairs with other humans to compare and look at outputs. But we can still give them all of those skills that they would like. I have an example of that, and I could show you if you require it at the end. The process actually and the product form the assessment. So the conversation is part of the assessed artifact. In practice, we could talk a little bit about that, but the students learn all of the skills that they would have with AI as a partner, all the pedagogical skills all the skills that they would expect to have come using AI. But there is critical evaluation, there is that construction of knowledge. There is the engagement in the classroom and so forth. but I'm, as the teacher, are organizing this. It's my pedagogy. I decide how it works. I also believe that agency is teachable. So I've done this with slow vibing workshops where I teach people to do this. No computing background. The empowerment is fantastic. You know, people feel empowered as learners and they're going away and learning new things, you know, and they've come back to me with apps that they have built. They've changed the way they do their research. They've changed the way they're working. And it's learning. Maybe they're older learners, you know, but they're back learning and they're now telling me they have found new joy in learning. But it's because I gave a structured methodology before even going near the AI. I told them how to do this. I'm telling them how they can learn with AI and how they learn, because the emphasis is on the learning and the AI is just a tool, not the farming, not this cognitive unloading, you know, that you mentioned earlier, Gidra. You know, the methodology is the intervention, and education and teaching is always about intervention, you know. So it transfers without users' technical expertise, but we help them a little bit about how they learn. So I have this autonomy equation because we asked about equations because I'm a scientist, you know, and we have to think about equations. So this is not a proper real equation, of course, but it gives you a sense of what I think we need to look at if we want to understand this autonomy in the classroom based around the stuff that we have. So I would say, so the autonomy, if I read it, it's the sum of the pedagogical intent times the human oversight over the algorithmic standardization. So as the standardization bias grows, our autonomy decreases unless we have some compensation. The denominator grows by default. Platforms standardize without active counter pressure. The numerator requires some deliberate investment, like curriculum design, prompt literacy, process assessment, whatever is your thing. And then more pedagogical intent plus more human oversight means that autonomy is preserved. So the goal here is to ensure the human remains the primary driver of the equation, I think. Again, based on my personal experiences. So my position, who shapes the digital classroom? Not the platform vendor, not the procurement committees, not the AI company, the educator with deliberate design. We have the power to retain this and do this, and we still should do that. Academic freedom in the area of AI is not the freedom to exclude AI from the room. Okay, it's the freedom to determine how AI mediates the learning encounter and to design assessments, curricula, and pedagogical process that reflect the disciplinary values rather than the platform defaults. So, it was all going so well. Well, maybe not. But the finding is that every educator who designs a new pedagogy around AI, rather than waiting for an institutional policy to decide it for them, is exercising academic freedom in its most meaningful form. I'm done. I have some questions for us, for me, and for anyone who might be listening. When a student submits AI assisted work, what are we assessing? You know, and what do we intend to assess? It's the institutional AI provision, like, you know, a single proof tool, some mandated LMS, compatible with procedural and substantive academic freedom. If the AI is the more knowledgeable other, who's responsible for its pedagogy? And can we meaningfully distinguish AI augmented thinking from AI replaced thinking in practice? And should our assessments try to? Pedagogy is all about the teaching practice and the assessment, and never just about how we do it, but, you know, the big thing. And what would a genuinely autonomy preserving AI integration policy look like in your institution or discipline? Thank you so much. I know I talk from computer science. I talk quickly, but hopefully we covered what you would like to hear, Gidra. And hopefully there was some relation with you, Aušrinė, as well. Thank you.
Thank you, John, a lot for your presentation. It just simply demonstrated your unique cross-disciplinary background that you bring to this with yourself, and this cross-disciplinary lens towards this topic, as you managed to it's always risky when someone from computer sciences talks about teaching, let's say, or pedagogy. Sometimes you can just feel a gap, not follow everything. But I think you kept the pedagogy as the center very successfully all the time, and just demonstrates your professionality and competence in this. You raised some questions, but for me, I have the whole page of notes and separate words, and it was interesting to see how I make some note of question and then you answer it in the following slides. So, but before I ask, we have 10 minutes left. Maybe Aušrinė, you want to join in as well. We don't have questions from the participants, but Aušrinė, maybe you have some notes, ideas, insights, answering to John's questions or in general.
So first of all, thank you very much. Great presentation. And for me, it seemed like, although we at the beginning discussed that, we did not discuss or prepare this whole framework of the seminar, but for me, it seemed like we did actually, because we touched so many similar aspects without even knowing each other's presentations, and also what Giedrė mentioned, John, and mine as well. I think that we did like a very nice overall and a presentation, and that it was like almost as prepared. And many things, of course, I liked about what you mentioned, and we're talking about the very last aspect when you said about academic freedom and applying artificial intelligence in education, that you cannot exclude it, that does not mean excluding it. And I totally agree, because academic freedom, as I mentioned in the presentation, it's not just the right of the professor. It's really a big responsibility towards the students, because they have the right to study, they have the right to learn, they have the right to get skills, and therefore we have to. It's our duty to learn how to teach now in the times when artificial intelligence is present, because the students were probably the first ones. I remember we were in the conference where the statistic was how many students, what is the percentage of students applying already AI tools, and the professors, and of course the students were those who started doing it first, and they learned how to use the tools also first, and therefore we have to learn how to use them as well, and how to train or how to teach the students what are the risks, challenges, how to use it properly. Because what also was said, and I think that this is also a very good point, also Giedrė mentioned this assessment trap, and as well you mentioned this assessment trap. And I think that those students who actually were the first ones to use artificial intelligence in their, for example, in their thesis, they were unfortunate ones, because they did not so many things when using artificial intelligence, and they did so many mistakes and did it wrong. And at the end, they failed or had to rewrite it or got a bad grade just because they did not have sufficient information. And for us as educators, it's a duty to inform them about the right way to apply the tool, to be honest, and how to know how to make a proper prompt and other things. So I think that those who started using it were not so fortunate. Now students are getting better and much more advanced. So really many great things that you touched upon. But now I also leave some time for Giedrė's questions, because we have a few minutes left.
Thank you a lot, Aušrinė. No, but I think it's not just students who had this trap. It's also with teachers who try not to lag behind, try to catch up. And John, you raised the very, I think even I would say rhetoric question, what we are sometimes assessing, if we are just trying to catch and recognize if student is using was using AI for their assignment, and then you need yourself, to get back and understand what you are really assessing, what your focus should remain on as a teacher. So I have just, maybe this is not a question, but by the end of the presentation, also it kept coming back to me, like the idea that we still need to go back to the teacher's digital competence. Uh, Pedagogical competence, you mentioned that many times, John, as well, that, this pedagogical, didactical content knowledge, which is related to the freedom of teaching as well. But then it's about this digital competence. I might be very good, but then how I use it, how may I integrate? And you are sharing great ideas about this dialogical engagement, what you are doing with your students in your courses. But I think that some cases, what even teachers in our research are saying at schools, we just need very practical working examples, not just, saying that you should change assessment. You need to use tools for Socratic dialogue. But how do I do that? How to do
Okay.
that correctly?
Okay.
So maybe you have one tip as we
Yeah.
are running out. Maybe you have one
Okay.
tip, both of you, how
Well,
you solve this and address this.
I mentioned the continual professional development, and I have these seminars where I will go and I'll teach people how to use the tool and show the examples. And they can bring their laptop, they can bring the computer, they can bring the question, and it's an open question, and I will show them how to do this as part of, I feel it's part of my role. If I know something, or if I don't know, I will learn and teach them. So I have another one coming up on the 13th of May, for example. It's 3 hours, and usually they're oversubscribed. People, my colleagues, they want to learn how to do new things with digital things. And then if they can, and if they don't have to pay, if they can do it in person where they get that classroom stuff, and if they, somebody gives them the time, they're prepared to learn. And I see the impacts because they come back and tell me. So I think we're a long way on from when we used to teach people how to use Word and PowerPoint, but people learned how to do all that with help. And my role is to get in there and help. It's good.
So just
Simple.
before Aušrinė, for you before you share, just one question. I think as we are having these discussions at our institution, at our universities, who decides what tool if you to use for coding, that it's
Oh,
ethical, legal, or
yeah.
it's a too broad topic?
Okay, so I sometimes think it's a good idea to just do it and apologize later, really. So I sandbox the tools to show what's possible. Okay.
Okay.
It may not be permissible, and we have allowable. So we, for example, allow Copilot here. It isn't good for the kind of things I would like to do. But I have shown people and will show people how to set up and run AI locally. I said my PhD student Mark, he's would have done this as well for colleagues, set up on local servers so they can get the benefit of how this, and they don't have the GDPR privacy kinds of issues. So, there should be somebody in your institution with technical expertise that could help with that, and then you get the experience. You're not left behind. You can make decisions about the technology and how it might shape what you do without having the other issues. Aušrinė, you probably have loads about the say on the legal and ethical of that.
Oh yeah, this topic. Yeah, let's not start on this one. I'll just very quickly comment on what John was talking about education. I very much agree, because what I can say that myself, not being very, IT savvy, everything I learned, basically, I learned by myself. And that's often a problem, that many things we learn by ourselves. It's okay in certain cases, but in more complicated matters, I think that it's really great when we can learn from a professional, because we would see so many things that we would not consider even learning by ourselves.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, very important, that now many people, or even well, I don't consider myself as the one who can learn everything by myself, but sometimes people think that they can easily do it, and that's also very risky because you don't take many things into account. So a timely qualified expert in the area, I think that this is a very good solution.
I think so. And Aušrinė, I don't know everything that I try to teach, I mean, I learn from the questions and I'm still learning from teaching, which is the joy it brings by going in and talking on this topic. I have to prepare, I have to study. There will be questions in class. I won't be prepared for it. It challenges me as a teacher. I learn and it becomes wonderful. And I'll know the next time, and it's okay to say I don't know. And, I mean, because that's how it is, and that's the joy of learning, is to have the freedom to be able to say, I don't know, I'll find out, I'll learn. I mean, isn't it great, the jobs we have?
Thank you so much, John. I think you are putting very nice final touches as our time has finished already. But I want to leave with an idea that you said, and I think this is a message that I personally and also my colleagues, we are always reminding our students, our teachers who are participating in trainings, that it's when we talk about digital technologies, regardless if it's AI or not, it's always the impact is on learning, and AI is just a tool. I mean, the focus still remain on learning, and this is how we shape the classroom. Now we start from designing it or using the default design as it is, but it's still about teachers' professional and pedagogical competence and everything that we bring as teachers, as human beings to the class. Thank you a lot. I think we had a very interesting discussion and presentation, and the webinar was really successful. So we will be happy to share the recording with others, and I have no doubt they will have interesting insights as well. So thank you all who will be watching it, and we will see maybe next events upcoming.
Thank you very much, Giedrė.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Giedrė.
you,
Thank you,
John and
Aušrinė. Bye-bye.
Aušrinė. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.